Oh, hello, and welcome back. I am the Cosmic Void, and I hope you've been enjoying my stories so far. I have so many stories, real and imagined, that I have just been dying to tell. The problem with being all-seeing and omnipotent is not boredom or disregarding things like life. It's actually pretty easy to value the living and put things into perspective. Because you see, if you really are all-knowing, you will understand with perfection exactly how the most infinitesimally small things mean so much to those experiencing it. Like life, small thing, really important to those experiencing it. Ergo, easy to not be an apocalyptic dickwad. It just requires a paradigm shift. Where was I? Ah yes, my biggest problem is never having an audience. And when you do get an audience, if you talk to them as an equal, they all end up insane. I mean, seriously, ascended world problems, am I right? Is that what young people are saying right now? That'll change in a little bit if it hasn't. Time is such a pain. I really don't like engaging with it. But all that is a long-winded way to say that today we are talking about something that will happen or has already happened in a different reality. Who says I need to be constrained to your thin little slice of existence? So without further ado, let's get into it. And let me tell you a tale from a nation of space-faring adrenaline junkies called the Ainurians. Come and listen to a voice collected from the void. Frigatrith was hard at work at his clan's public library. It wasn't really a library. Heck, there are hardly any books in these things. Sufficiently advanced societies evolve to the point of only needing paper for, well, toilet stuff. And the libraries of the Ainurians include amenities and tools that make it function as a school, workshop, training ground, and laboratory. But the Ainurians were descendants of refugees fleeing forced enlistment into a galaxy-spanning conflict, and though a lot had changed, some things, like the use of the word library, stubbornly stuck around. Frigatrith, or Atrith as his friends called him, sat at a terminal which looked like a blend of what you, my viewer, are used to, and what can only be described as rural Southern American ingenuity with lasers. It had a screen and a board with mechanical buttons, and then a small metal rod about as thick as your ring finger and about as long as, let's say 2 hands. I'll call this implement a digital screwdriver. Frigatrith sat patiently reading his screen, occasionally pressing buttons, and then at other times he picked up the digital screwdriver and touched and waved it around the insides of what appeared to be a water bottle cut in half lengthwise with LEDs on the inside. As he pressed keys and waved a sci-fi wand, his screen flashed with a dizzying array of math, explanations, and diagrams that looked suspiciously like a well-thought-out mechanical engineering design, which was in the process of being, quote, improved, end quote, by a child who was too smart for their own good. And, well, it looked like that because that's exactly what it was. Frigatrith was a 15-year-old boy with ash-gray skin and a gap in his 2 front teeth. Like most Ainurians, he was tall, and like most youth, he was supremely self-conscious about his looks. This led to him being unusually quiet as he fought to keep his hated teeth hidden. He had been given the nickname Clenchfish on account of children everywhere being idiots and the tightness with which he pressed his lips together. Usually, this was a nervous reaction to other people's proximity, but in special times like now, it was what could only be called a quiet temper tantrum. Come on, you piece of shit. It's not a flaw, it's a feature. The shell acts as the support here, saving load and increasing capacity, he muttered under his breath. He continued working, lost in the moody shifts from tranquility at his own brilliance to a turbulently peeved state. This was interrupted by his screen freezing, and a blinking red circle appeared in the bottom right corner. Atrith aggressively smashed a key with his index finger until the light went away and his work resumed at a slightly less feverish pace. Before he could slip back into the zone, the blinking light froze everything again, and the angry keyboard mashing resumed.
I am not inclined to give second chances without good reason, hopeful.
A stern voice barked through Atreth's frustration. He immediately stiffened. Though he had only spoke with this person twice, everyone in his city knew the voice of Raid Chief Halmond, sir. Atreth locked his gaze forward and sat straight-backed and stock still. He dared not move his eyes or body. He was in the presence of greatness and needed to demonstrate his discipline. Momentarily, a man's albino face sneaked around Atreth's right side. His eyes were mismatched in size. His scruffy gray facial hair had grown just past the 5 o'clock shadow phase. The hair on top of his head also wasn't doing him any favors, with his cranium balding in seemingly random spots, and his shoulder-length locks seemed permanently glued together in strands of grease. Overall, his head and facial hair looked like it gave lectures about not peaking too early in life. This sentiment was reinforced with emaciated cheekbones and fatigued eyes. Only his mouth held a little smile, and with the rest of the ensemble that was his face, it was impossible to tell if said smile was deranged or just happy. Atreth felt like he was being stared at by an oversized bird that had spent the last 5 years in solitary confinement, surviving on Nutri paste and bestial erotica. He allowed his eyes to drift to the right and couldn't help but shudder as he tried to hold back giggles at the most respected member of his community's ridiculous appearance, his face flushed with guilt at his bubbling disrespect, which caused his mortified nervousness to add to the assault on his sensibilities.
Why the hell did you think I wanted to be called Sir?
Said Raid Chief Halmond, suspected bird and supremely important man.
I swear, each younger generation spends more and more time gobbling up Homeworld Republic entertainment. Got all you kids thinking we're a military outfit. Do I look like a military man? No, I look like something any self-respecting military would use for target practice. I am a state-sponsored acquisitions expert. My specialty just happens to be violence.
Atreth was fighting for his life as the rant continued.
So the only thing I ever want to hear from you, especially if we get the luxury of working together, is check this out. Hell yeah, or go screw yourself. Now, show me where you're at.
Yes, sir.
Kid, I will lick your eyeballs in an incredibly illegal fashion if that word leaves your mouth.
Atreth couldn't help it. The giggles started in short, hyperventilating squeaks. Halmond's smile grew slowly at this. Then he joined in with a chuckle.
Yeah, see? There it is. Laugh a little. We're just planning life and death. Nothing to get too serious about. Now.
He paused to slap the younger boy's shoulder and kept his arm around him good-naturedly and said,
Again, show me what you've got.
Hell yeah. Atreth couldn't help but smile as with a few button presses, the math disappeared and was replaced with the project that was his pride and joy.
Sticking with the varicose tactical ulcer design, I see. Have you gotten the neural link ironed out yet?
The older man asked. Wait, how did you know I was working on that?
Kid, it's my job to lead men gloriously to their deaths, and for some odd reason, you assholes think that I should judge who gets to join the meat grinder. So yes, whenever some kid picks up a soldering iron and thinks they're hot shit because they can now cause property damage, I know about it.
How?
It's a public library, and Chief Librarian Igor and I go way back. Now, your neurals?
I still have no idea where that name comes from. All our holds knowledge, and no mention of the word Igor. Atreth sulked. Then he said clearly, It's only at 72%, so enough for a test drive,
but not enough to finish construction from the cockpit.
They both finished together, then fell silent as they each looked at the design. Atreth started to get uncomfortable, so he ventured a question. Does it really make that much of a difference in development? Halman stood up and crossed his arms, nodding as he replied.
Night and day. Here you need to use clunky analog and issue commands for every single little freaking step. But when your mech's neurals are jacked into the hangar and you're jacked into your mech, making modifications or repairs becomes as easy as pissing or snorting Felka root.
Atreth blushed at that last bit. He was used to crass speech, his people considered it a vital part of their culture, but he was beginning to suspect that raiders left so they could casually and belligerently cross the lines that even his free-spirited folk only towed.
You should switch the chassis to be based off the Runningback template.
Halman's offhand comment took a second to register with Atreth. What? That crappy old thing? That's not even good enough to handle local behemoth defense and hunting, much less go toe-to-toe with the warriors you deal with on raids. Are you trying to make me fail?
Kid, only losers want to see other people fail. I'm just giving advice.
About building a walking trash heap?
And using a 150-year-old design is better?
Halman held up his hand to stall any protest.
The Varicose was revolutionary for its time, but the problem is, we as a people studied it so much that it's not going to bring anything new to the table. You won't survive the arena. Every single operating template has countermeasures as part of the base model.
Maybe the mech won't surprise anyone, but check out the main armament I'm working on. It's less a cannon and more a holster for little cannons that are situational that I can pull out whenever needed. I even added a blade to each end in case I run out of ammo, and it's got built-in boosters if I can't get close. Atreth pulled up the green and black blueprints for what looked to be a flat war paddle with slots running up and down each side.
Interesting design. Trying to make a Swiss Army knife.
What's that?
Never mind. Ancient history. This is all well and good, but what happens when you throw the damn thing after your tricks are up?
I thought of that. The only complex processor I added to the mech was a homing lock. It's integrated with the whole of the nervous systems, so as long as something is getting power, I can signal the boosters to come back, and the computer will provide the best path.
And distributing this decision module across the mech will take the strain off your nervous system. And it's a zombie system, functioning as long as the mech is. Alright, it's intriguing. I'll give you that. Just remember, you've got 3 years before your first arena fights, and then you have to survive 3 fights against kids just like you. That is to say, you're not special. Everyone in there is a smart, driven, aggressive little cookie. And I might accept you if you get past all that. I hope you iron out some kinks before then.
Halman slapped Atreth's back a little too hard, and then turned and walked back the way he came.
Oh, and hopeful, meet me at the arena on balcony C35 in 1 hour.
The older man called over his shoulder. Hell yeah, Atreth said under his breath. As he leaned back into the terminal, he told himself his hand shook from excitement and not frustration at his own ignorance. Igor? Swiss Army knife? Why a Runningback? Atreth was running late. He thought he could figure out just one last thing in that hour he had been given. What seemed to be a small problem had instead revealed itself to be a small, but very annoying and time-consuming problem that would require way more effort than the young man felt was justified. Panting, he raced up the stairs to the balcony. Everything was patchwork corrugated steel, exposed pipes, and random cement fixtures. An outsider would think it was a football stadium from hell that was about to collapse any minute and kill the population of a small city in the wreckage. Everyone who lived in Atreth's clan city knew better. The building came from decommissioned starships, and if something could survive impacts from stray space debris at faster than light speeds, it could survive most everything a terrestrial environment could throw at it. Granted, it did need some new welds to hold everything together every once in a while, but that was the price you paid for having military hardware fight in an enclosed space. Atreth finally made it to the top floor and was greeted with a massive dominating window. He looked to either side. No one was there. Slightly annoyed and confused, he approached and turned his attention to the ridiculously thick glass and the match beyond. The arena was massive. The fighting floor wasn't so much a stage as a landscape. The center was dominated by what was once a large hill, but man-made erosion via artillery shells had worn it down considerably. Craters pocked the surface, and decommissioned buildings had been unceremoniously lifted up from the outside city and dropped in at seemingly random spots. 2 twisted wrecks of mechs lay sparking and smoking near the center, while the shots from 3 others surrounding the hill roared and pinged off the scenery and arena walls. Displays on the edges of the window filled in any gaps that couldn't be seen, from ammunition levels, an overhead map, damage reports, health diagnostics of the competing jockeys, and much more. There was even an annoying display in a corner for a betting pool on which of the competing hopefuls would have a nervous breakdown.
They always do this.
Atreth jumped as he heard Halman's voice, but couldn't see anything.
Up here, kid.
Atreth looked up to see Halman sitting on top of a cement buttress that looked like a support beam. His trench coat and one leg were hanging down, and he seemed bored as he stared out the gigantic balcony window. The young man turned his attention back to the match, seeing a mech based off the design he had just verbally trashed among the 3 crouched behind cover taking pot shots. He heard a thump as Halman jumped down to stand next to him. "What do they always do?" he asked the older man.
Oh, hide when they get scared.
He said absent-mindedly. "Isn't that normal?" Atreth asked.
Yes, and I don't like it. If you make the cut, I don't want you hiding because you don't want to get shot. I want you hiding because you can't wait to shoot the other guys. I like sneaky. Cowards can stay home."
Halman said matter-of-factly, his voice not matching the harsh criticism. As they watched, an arm-mounted weapon from one of the destroyed mechs fired off a blinding plasma blast. Atreth wasn't sure if it was a malfunction or intentional, but its effects were devastating. The building covering one of the combatants was blown backwards. Shredded chunks of concrete slammed into the mech, knocking it off balance and leaving it both exposed and unsteady. The Runningback and the other mech wasted no time in turning their guns on the reeling competitor, leaving twisted scrap after a few moments of staccato gunfire. Atreth glanced at the bottom of the window where a display showed the 5 combatants' names, their mech templates, and their current health status. To his shock, they were all green. "I'm amazed that he's okay. That plasma blast looked nasty by itself. Also, I can see why the plasma mech was taken out first," Atreth said. Halman grunted and stayed silent for a moment as the last 2 combatants turned their weapons on each other and took stock of the situation.
The jockey that just got wrecked? The kid survived his first arena, but lost an arm. I told him to fix his deflection cage, that he was trying to be too cute. Looks like he listened. But these guys, the one in the Runningback and the other Mr. Fancy Pants, I got nothing to say to them.
He motioned vaguely. They watched as after a few pot shots, the other mechs stomped out into the open and simply started firing all guns at the cover of the Runningback. Furious blasts responded against the aggressor's armor, but it walked through them almost contemptuously, firing repeatedly until the cover and then the mech behind it were dismantled with explosive precision. See? That's what I'm saying. The Runningback is fast for its weight class, but that doesn't mean anything with advanced targeting computers, and its frame doesn't accommodate weaponry that can excel at any range. It's just big and fast. So it can, maybe do well in close combat, but it's got nothing to get it there. It sucks, and I will never incorporate anything from its template into my design. Atreth spoke derisively as only a teenager can. Then he remembered who was standing next to him. Raid Chief Halman. And he started to stutter. I guess I don't really see. What do you think, sis?
If you say, sir, I swear on my mother's dead ovaries that I will personally wreck you in there in 3 years' time. That kid was smart. He did his homework and he knows the one advantage a running back has. But knowing it in your noggin and knowing it in a no-shit firefight are two completely different things.
Atreth stared, even more confused. He started to open his mouth but was interrupted again.
Just wait and watch the next match. We have 30 minutes.
The cleanup bots came out and first cut the pilots out and then began hauling the scrap away. No mech, not even the winner, had come out unscathed. All would be returning to the hangar for a redesign. Partway through this, Atreth's uncomfortable musings were interrupted again.
That pattern that took out the running back at the end. You know it, right? It's so sleek, sexy, and dangerous. It's got the weird head with 4 telescope things on the side. Can only be a big mama, right?
Atreth nodded at the question. Howman continued.
Every young Raider hopeful wants to be the one to make that design work. But the neurals are so convoluted and heavy that only those special someones can actually design and then pilot the things.
So spinal burnout is real? Like, you've seen it? Atreth asked. This was a particular fear of his and part of the reason he was being so cautious and slow in completing the mech's control and communication systems, also known as its neurals.
Oh yeah. We don't have the direct AI control of the machines, the genius tech of the Ascendants, or a willingness to sacrifice mobility for firepower like the Republic. When you get in, a part of your brain and nervous system gets used to supplement the machine's computers, and we need the edge that mobility and control gives us. We do have safeguards against the mechs going too far and using too much brain power, but in a particularly long raid, we always lose a few jockeys due to nerve damage caused by constant use.
Howman explained.
Now, where was I? Oh yeah, that big mama. Pretty useless template if no one can build the thing and it actively hurts you just for driving it.
Oh. Atreth didn't bother trying to hide some of his disappointment as he looked at his feet.
Still, that amount of firepower was made in answer to the Republic's Cosmo and the Ascendant's Horus. And those two designs are reserved for those nations' ace pilots.
I know all that. Well, not the burnout. Most kids my age think that's just a rumor. But that's not what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that I was going to make a big mama at first, but
the specs were too convoluted and you couldn't finish it in time. I get it. We've all been there. But what if I told you that's not the reason the clans keep so few active big mamas around?
I'm not sure what you mean. And I'm really starting to dislike my knowledge being so questioned, Chief. Atreth said, trying to cover the shame of his ignorance. Howman laughed.
If you gave me or any of my senior raiders a year, we could sort out the design specs and make it something that anyone, even an idiot, could create and iterate on in time for their tests in there. But we don't. Because all of us who have raided with those things know the secret. Those stupid machines are always running into ammunition problems. None of those fancy cannons actually mean anything if you can't shoot them.
But that doesn't make sense. Their ammo capacity is high enough for several engagements if the jockey is wise with their shots, and targeting computers should further reduce ammo needed, Atreth said.
Again, it's one thing to know that in your noggin. It's another thing to remember that in a firefight. Don't let anyone fool you. You either fall into one of two camps with your relationship to violence. Either combat is scary, or you're insane. In both cases, saving ammo, generally not a high priority. And unlike everyone else, we don't get easy resupplies. The Republic, best and easiest supply lines in the galaxy. They mass produce gun lines because they know they can fire whatever they need to, however long they need to, from wherever it's convenient to do so. The Ascendants, they mass produce quality. They don't need supply lines. They just need to hit you once. And their fanatical jockeys, Sorry, they actually call them priests, and the Republic actually calls them infantrymen. Fun fact. The Ascendant's priests are the most fanatically trained, drilled, and cared for soldiers in the galaxy. They don't miss. As for the machines, they hate wasting metal that could be used for another Dyson sphere, so they just use a mining rig. Drills don't need ammo, and that's why so many of our templates can throw a punch. But what do we get? Do we get endless ammo? Do we get to mass produce mechs to the point of calling them armored infantry? What do we produce?
Why do we need to mass produce anything? Our ancestors ran to avoid forced conscription. We just need those medals everyone else has. Atreth said defensively. Halmond paused at this, and for the first time he looked a little sad. Like he was hearing something he had grown so tired of correcting, he had moved past being disappointed and into nihilism. Finally, he opened his mouth and asked,
You think the only reason we go on raids is because of our local reptilian subterranean megafauna?
Isn't it? We can't mine the homeworlds, and when a behemoth wakes, we need these mechs and guns. Well, bigger guns. And if everyone else would just treat us like people and trade, buy and sell and crap, we wouldn't raid, Atreth said quietly.
Sorry, kid, I misjudged you a little. You aren't as stupid as some of the other children. You're right. If we could trade, we would be okay. But let me ask you one final question. Do you know what pilots the machines' mechs and smaller infantry?
Atreth shook his head.
Kids. Like you. All the way to 18 years. You get to prepare, custom build your own mech, and then test it in the arena. It gets wrecked, you get to rebuild it. Hopefully you've made something worthy of a raid after 3 tries. Do you know what those kids have to do to be a machine's mech pilot?
Halmond raised his fingers to quote that last word. Atreth shook his head again.
They become pilots because they failed some insane test. Their minds are deemed unfit to serve as a gestational template for a new AI. So they're lobotomized. But humans have an awesome set of nerves, so they stitch them into a machine so some lower AI bastard can treat them as a barely living flesh puppet and give it just that little bit more processing power and control over the machine.
Atreth stared.
Hell, and the ones you might be fighting, they stitch 4 or 5 of those poor kids in there, still living in constant agony. I've seen them, fought them more times than I care to count, had to kill one with my bare hands once. We don't fight because of our local behemoths. Not really.
He turned his gaze on Atreth, eyes narrowed, and Chief Halmond no longer looked so silly. He looked like a predator staring down a hostile world, calculating and poised for action.
We fight, raid, kill, and steal because out there in the stars is horror, and I will do whatever it takes to keep it away from home.
Atreth looked back at the window, disturbed. He knew that even now the war raged across the stars, but he always thought his people were separate from it. He had been raised with this attitude that the other nations were killing each other, and raiders went out to get what his people needed, but everyone else's troubles didn't really concern the Ainurians. Even though he wanted to call him Sir because it sounded cool, it disturbed Atreth to hear a fellow Ainurian speak in such intimate terms concerning the conflict. Like they were an active part of the war and nobody else realized it. As he watched, the next match started. 5 massive doors slid open. 5 mechs stomped into the battlefield. 4 immediately raced to cover and began firing measuring shots at their opponents. The 5th one, well, it surprised him. Please don't tell me that the Runningback's superpower is the ability to sit cross-legged, he said, exasperated. Ha! Halmond chuckled, and his amiable demeanor returned.
Watch. This girl, she gets it. And I think after this you will too.
Even as he said that, the mech sprang up impossibly fast and began sprinting at the closest opposition, who was conveniently turned and firing at a more threatening target. The Runningback bulldozed through buildings to slam into the turning mech, knocking it down and stomping on the metal form. On the other side of the arena, one of the mechs had a back-mounted mortar, and the jockey seemed to be a whiz sharpshooter because the other two mechs found themselves driven out from behind their cover in an attempt to get away from the light artillery falling from the sky. Furious shots salvoed out as the three jockey hopefuls panicked under the exposure and attention. And into this maelstrom, the Runningback charged. It had guns, but its jockey chose not to use them, instead jumping suicidally onto the closest target. Within seconds, it had ripped the leg off its unfortunate victim and was using that to smash it. The other exposed mech noticed this and chose to turn on her while trying to strafe into cover. The jockey stopped just in time to race to a building under a hail of mortars and direct fire. It grabbed a wall and flung it at the non-artillery mech. "That won't do anything to a mech's armor," Atreth said, but as he watched, the mech's automobile-sized shotgun swiveled to shoot the chunks of wall flying at it, not the jockey, which was now sprinting at it behind cover.
Targeting computers. So helpful, eh?
Howman smirked as he watched the Runningback get close to its opponent and demolish it. This time, however, the Runningback reached down and ripped the arm off the prone enemy mech. And Atreth's mind was blown as the Runningback's right forearm reshaped itself to fit into the still sparking metal limb. And within seconds, the Runningback's profile no longer included an oversized and useless right arm, but a very nice and very nasty firearm. It turned at this point, and while the new combat shotgun was heavier and slowed it down, it was still fast enough to outpace its mortar opponent, fire all of its shells at close range, and then finish the final contestant by gently pulling the mech apart, like a child unwrapping a Christmas present. What was that? Atreth gawked, not caring about his exposed gap tooth. The Runningback was walking to the center of the hill, waving its arms and grandstanding.
Ascendant Tech. One of the other clans salvaged one of their mechs. And when their god AI caught wind of this, we were about to have an all-out war, especially once it was learned that we had already reverse engineered a module that would let us interface with any machine, no matter the maker.
Atreth still gasped as the old man continued his history lecture.
We weren't ready to deal with the full Ascendant might, so the clans convened and reached a compromise. We would only allow this module to be built into a shitty mech that everyone thought was absolutely useless. And now, when we need ammo, the Runningbacks in a raid take it from our dead enemies. I can't count the number of times our retreat has been covered by our enemies' worst weapons being turned back on them by these crazies. I will take 5 Runningbacks over 10 Big Mamas any day of the week.
Howman said, turning to Atreth and grinning like a loon.
Hey boss, roof's open and the kid's got what it takes. We're gonna jump him.
A voice crackled from a pocket of Howman's suit. Atreth started and looked up. He didn't know the ceiling of the arena opened up. Even as he watched, 3 dots in the sky seemed to grow larger and larger until he realized they were mechs in freefall, heading right towards the arena. Oh my God, he whispered in awe. He was actually seeing it, a drop in person. The Runningback in the arena noticed this too and turned to look up. This was a mistake, as a 4th mech seemed to step out of thin air behind it and sucker punched the Runningback. The other 3 landed with thunder, glory, and a shaking earth. It wasn't a fight. It was a mauling. The 4 mechs, all based off the Runningback template, but customized and decorated to be entertainingly different, surrounded the poor hopeful's mech and hammered it with a continuous, frenzied, and strangely coordinated rain of metal spikes and fists. The girl tried to swing back, kick, roll, do anything, but all of her moves were predicted and intercepted with boulder-sized fisticuffs. Finally, one of the aggressors speared its hand forward, piercing the cockpit. "No!" You killed her! We get 3 chances! She was on 2! And you don't get to do that! Atreth shouted, horrified. Howman just looked at him with a raised eyebrow. The mech that was spearing the Runningback slowly shifted its hand into a fist and extracted the still thrashing girl inside, holding her pinned gingerly and very much alive in its massive metal fingers. Atreth continued to stare, confused, as another one of the mechs reached across the cockpit of the one holding the girl and ripped its face off, revealing a man calmly unbuckling himself. The jockey got out of the new hole in his mech's head, climbed onto its shoulder, and nonchalantly sauntered across its arm to the hand holding the girl.
Hey, kid.
The voice crackled from Howman's coat.
You made it. Good stuff. Got anything you want to say to the chief?
Yeah, a feminine voice said. You dickbags wrecked my sweet Josie too much. It'll take forever and I'll miss the deadline now. 4 gruff voices laughed uproariously at this. The pilot reached out and ruffled the girl's hair like she was a toddler.
Don't worry about it, kid. We'll help you out. Tell you what, here's a deal. I'll help fix her up and make it so no one can ever do what we just did to you ever again. And you promise to let me die first. I'll even save a patch of grass for you on my way down. Huh? Pretty sweet deal, yeah? So anyways, laugh a little, because you just made it into the Mad Dogs. Woohoo! Oh. You're a raider now.
Howman looked sideways at Atreth.
Good luck on your design. I'm excited to see it in 3 years.
He walked off and left the young boy's mind racing. Wait! Atreth's cries stopped Howman at the top of the stairs. We mass-produce trickery. Or rather, people who can make the important things seem small and unimportant. Nobody saw Howman smile as he descended. Whew, well, all right. Thank you so much. That was a long one. I hope you enjoyed it, and do leave a comment telling Mr. Factory that, his newest redesign should involve more hot dogs. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the story and the little mech creation we did. And until next time, have a wonderful existence.